It's a day that I never look forward to on the NFL calendar, but it's a day that always comes, and it's one that obviously requires our attention and something we have to dig through. But it is officially Black Monday in the NFL, and we knew we would get some news. There's some that were to be expected. I think there was one that at least somewhat of a surprise in the sense that I think it was kind of on the fence, but we've got a handful of firings that we are going to be sorting through today.
It's the least fun day of the calendar, it feels like, which is crazy because yesterday, like last Sunday, is one of the most exciting on the calendar.
Yeah.
Like week 18, you're trying to sort out like who's going to get the 1 seed, who's going to be in the playoffs, and not within 24 hours, you're whipped around and have to talk about like 4 or 5 guys who have lost their job now.
We have, I think, 4 head coach firings over the past 24 hours or so. We're just going to kind of go in chronological order because that's how this doc is laid out. We got our first one last night. Raheem Morris fired by the Atlanta Falcons. GM Terry Fontenot also fired by the Atlanta Falcons. Rich McKay, who was the CEO of the Falcons, is now becoming the CEO of, I think it's just like Blank Enterprises or some like weird, just overarching company. Obviously, Arthur Blank owns the soccer team down there. It's a big sports organization. So Rich McKay is being reassigned a little bit. They're going to promote somebody from within to be the new CEO. It sounds like they're going to be bringing in a president of football operations to kind of oversee everything. That person might be Matt Ryan. The moral of the story is the Falcons are cleaning house after what has been, even with a strong finish, I think undeniably a pretty disappointing season in Atlanta.
It's one of those things that I think the strong finish is cool if it's year 1 of a regime. It's not as cool when it's year 2, when people thought that you had playoff aspirations.
And should have.
Yes, and should have. And they were knocked out of playoff aspirations like a month ago. They were locked out of it. And so the record looks fine now, but they'd been out of this thing for a while. And so it was a really disappointing season pretty much from start to finish. I think the Terry Fontenot thing is like that had to happen. And we've talked about that before. Like outside of a lot of the picks that he's made in the top 10, they've just missed on a whole lot of stuff. And I know that because if you look at a lot of his other draft classes, they have not made a lot of very good picks outside of the first round. In 2021, they had Drew Dahlman, who they chose not to retain when his deal came up. And they could have done that. And he's now been incredible for Chicago. In 2022, they draft Tyler Algier. And then I guess you can say this year, the 2 DBs that you drafted, Billy Bowman and Xavier Watts, like there's a little bit of something there. But other than that, they have not found guys who are really anything more than like okay off of the bench players in those rounds. And then even some of their free agent signings, it's like you had Jesse Bates and I guess Darnell Mooney was nice. And it's not a whole lot outside of that.
They also paid a shitload of money for Jesse Bates.
Right. Yeah. They paid sticker price for him. Yeah. It's not like they got some sort of steal and he's giving you surplus value or anything like that.
We've talked about this a lot when it came to the decision that the Falcons were going to have to make. I think you could absolutely make an argument that it's only been 2 years for Raheem Morris. It's not so bad where you can't justify bringing him back and think, okay, can they maybe work through some of the issues that they have on offense? But I'm 100% with you in the sense that the way they've built the roster, the way they've gone about building the roster, it's been 5 years now for Terry Fontenot in Atlanta, and I don't think there's enough appreciable progress that you feel confident about where this thing is going. And so I think he has to go. And if he's going to go, do you want to pair a potential lame duck head coach with a new GM, and not even just a new GM, but a completely new building that you are now kind of building from top to bottom? I think it just made more sense, and I can understand why they just want a completely fresh start. We are going to hit the reset button on this entire thing, and we're going to start over with what we want this to be.
That's the thing. Like, I think if the GM situation were a little bit different, I don't know if Raheem Morris gets fired. Like, I don't think a lot of what they've done is that offensive. Like, if they had brought him back, I don't think it would have been that crazy, especially because, like, I know the offense was a little bit trickier this year and it wasn't quite as good. I still think Zach Robinson's a decent play caller on offense. And then on defense, Jeff Ulbrich did a really good job for them. So Raheem, I think, has hired a lot of the right people there in that respect. And so, again, I think if the situation were a little bit different, maybe he doesn't lose his job. With the GM thing, it's just like, I feel like the way that this thing was built, what Fontenot did with the quarterbacks really backed them into a corner. And I really do think why Raheem Morris is losing his job is if you bring back the coaching staff, it does feel like you're a little bit tied into what this quarterback situation is, and you're stuck with it. If you just sever ties with both the GM and the head coach, you're still going to be stuck with them financially and capital-wise, but it does feel like you're entering a different clean slate with that.
If you're Arthur Blank in this situation, and you had, I think, a combination of the front office and the coaching staff, and I think the combination of the front office coaching staff is what brought them to this point. I think that 2 years ago in the offseason, they signed Kirk Cousins as a way to compete right away. And then the coaching staff got involved in the process, and the coaching staff really liked Michael Penix, and that's how you end up with Michael Penix. And if you're Arthur Blank and you look at how much you invested in quarterback in 2024, and now you're at the end of the 2025 season and none of them worked out, like you have no clear answer. Like the fact that we invested this much at quarterback and now we still might not have one, that's probably disqualifying for Terry Fontenot in the front office on its own.
Mhm.
And so then again, you get the kind of trickle down effect with, well, if you're going to move on from them, why not just move on from the coaching staff?
They have the most unenviable position at quarterback, I think, in the entire league. Because a lot of other teams are stuck in like a bad spot of like, we don't have an answer, or you've got to draft the guy.
For Penix? You think it's over?
I didn't, to be clear, I really did not love him as a prospect. And I don't think he showed anything that crazy that would lead you to believe he's going to be that much more than like an average starter. I think even in some of the best of circumstances. And then I will say, like, I think Kirk was fine this year, but you're at the end of the road with him. Like, he's an older quarterback. You're paying him a ton of money. And so I just think I think if we're talking about pure quality of the position going into 2026, they're not the worst. But just in terms of like what you're tied to, how much it cost you to get here, and how hard it's going to be to find a new answer, they might have the most unenviable position.
I still think there's a path for Penix just because I do think that there's arm talent there. Like he has tools. And so guys like that, even if they have flaws, and he undeniably has flaws, I still think you could see a potential path for him moving forward. What you said about the offense and the defense, I want to sit in that just for a second. I'm with you with the offense. We've talked about this in a little bit, how I think what happened with Atlanta's offense this year kind of reminds me of some of the ways that the Dolphins' offense has gone over the last few years, where you have this kind of very specific thing that you want to be, and you drill deeper and deeper and deeper into that specific thing, and then you kind of realize the limitations of that. I would have been curious coming into this offseason if they kind of threw everything back on the table and said, okay, what do we really want to be that isn't necessarily tied to this kind of like shotgun pistol-based offense that we stumbled into last year? If we put everything, if we evaluate every single option for what the offense can be, I do think there is a path for this staff with this group of players to come out on the other side of it with a decent answer. And when you combine that with what they did on defense this year and kind of what Jeff Ulbrich was able to get out of that group, I think that's enough for you. I want to see one more year from the staff, but unfortunately, the other dynamics at play don't allow that to happen, and I can understand why.
That's where I was at. Like, I was frustrated that the offense got a little bit stale this year, but there was so much of what I liked in the first year, and I still think that Zach Robinson does some decent things. And also, they were just more unlucky this year. Like, Darnell Mooney gets hurt, Michael Penix gets hurt, and like, he might not have been great, but like the fact that your starting quarterback goes down throws a wrench in some things. And then honestly, this wasn't an unlucky part. It was a little bit because Caleb McGarry gets hurt right before the season, but the offensive line was also just significantly worse. Like, Jake Matthews was another year older. Losing Drew Dahlman, I think, hurt them. Like, when you are, they are a simple run game. It's a lot of just like outside zone from the pistol. And if you're going to be that, that's fine if your offensive line kicks ass. When you lose your right tackle, your left tackle gets older, and you lose your center, who's really, really good, it's a little bit harder to be as stale as you are and like consistently get the explosives that you want and build the offense through that.
The Mooney thing is kind of the last point I want to make about Terry Fontenot specifically. Them doing nothing on offense this offseason. Nothing. They added no pieces to the offense, and they did it on purpose. That, to me, shows a real lack of vision for what it is to build and maintain a roster in the NFL. I think that a lot of teams that get sidetracked and make mistakes in how they think about how they move their team from point A to point B. This happens all the time. You get tunnel vision about what was wrong, and it forces you to lose perspective or causes you to lose perspective on everything else. And so in Atlanta's case, they thought, okay, we need pass rushers, pass rushers, pass rushers. If we get that fixed, the offense will just be a slight step better than it was last year, because why wouldn't it be in year two? And that's just not how things work.
You leave yourself no room for something to go wrong, like a right tackle going down right before
or Mooney
the
getting
season,
hurt,
or Mooney getting hurt. Exactly.
You've given yourself no depth and no contingencies. And again, I think that to me is the issue, is that very often with this group, I think you just saw a lack of vision and a lack of understanding that you needed to be flexible in how you were thinking about this stuff. It was a lot of, well, as long as we get X solved, then we'll be okay. As long as we get Y solved, then we'll be okay. And that's just very rarely how a lot of this works, and they did it often. And I think that's how you arrive in this moment, and that's why the front office really running out of road leads the coaching staff to getting one fewer years than they probably deserved.
Right. They just consistently over-leverage themselves to fix short-term, solve some problems, and that's how you arrive where you arrive.
Two guys that they've requested interviews with reportedly so far, the Falcons, Klint Kubiak, which it's going to be a really interesting
I don't know what to
Klint
make
Kubiak.
of what's going on with that.
Klint Kubiak, I think a lot of people are going to ask, why isn't Klint Kubiak a hotter candidate for some of these jobs based on what he has done as the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks? I think that's a fair question. My response to that would be, Klint Kubiak is not the most dynamic personality. I don't think he's going to be winning a lot of press conferences. And that's going to be important to some teams. And I do think that command is an important part of this job. And I do think that's why you probably haven't heard Klint Kubiak's name mentioned quite as often as like the hotshot offensive coordinator in this cycle compared to guys in previous years. Where Ben Johnson, it was kind of like, oh, is he a little bit robotic? You know, is he a little bit
But he
nerdy?
clearly commands a room.
It's a very different thing than it is with Klint Kubiak, who I think is just more of a reserved personality. The other guy that they're interviewing is kind of on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to that. And I do think schematically he has done a good job with the Dolphins. Anthony Weaver is a very commanding and kind of charming personality. And so the fact that those are the two guys that they've sought out right now is actually kind of funny to me.
I'm really into like Weaver as like, I really hope that he gets a lot of interviews and really gets a lot of chances. Because again, I do think a lot of the most interesting candidates in this cycle are defensive guys. And so I think obviously like or Chris Shula is going to be one of the big ones. Jesse Minter is going to be one of those are probably the two that people are going to be looking at. But I really do think Anthony Weaver, as far as like those defensive guys, especially ones that are fresh, like, Vance Joseph might get some looks and stuff like that. But in terms of guys who are fresh, I'm really interested to see Weaver, because we talked about it when we were talking about Mike McDaniel of like, oh, this team is still playing really hard. That defense, the secondary wasn't talented, but they were still playing their asses off very deep into the season.
They finished 20th in a weighted defensive DVOA.
That ain't bad, man.
The Dolphins did.
With no secondary players.
No secondary, and you traded away your best front seven player at the deadline, and the defense was better down the stretch. And we look at that 2023 Ravens defense and just how much of a unit that group was. They were dominant. He was on that staff and carries over some of those ideas. Like, that is the modern defensive meta in the league. And again, he's not just like a wonk in the back room drawing up stuff. I do think that he is somebody that is engaging and to me is an intriguing name when it comes to some of this. And I'm glad that just because the Dolphins finished 20th on defense, it's not pushing him out of some of these conversations and considerations.
I 100% agree. The last thing I want to say here with Klint Kubiak, he did work with Kirk Cousins in 2021 with Minnesota, and I wonder how much of that, for better or for worse, plays into that. Because that offense honestly was not that good. And so I wonder how much of like, did they just think that was something else? And I think that was his first run at play calling. So that's obviously a consideration as well. So I'm just interested to see how that part of it goes.
This is always fun. They have two different search firms overseeing the pursuits and the processes for both head coach and GM, which we'll see how that goes. Two names I'm curious about when it comes to retention on the staff, and two names if I needed guys in these positions I'd be looking at in this cycle. We already mentioned Jeff Ulbrich. I think he did a very good job with the defense in Atlanta this year. And what I thought was so encouraging about the job that he did is that it wasn't the same stuff he was doing with the Jets. It was very different. And so I think he had a lot of self-reflection this offseason, and I think he showed a lot of nimbleness in how he wanted to build that defense and unleash it. That's something I'd be attracted to if I were the Cowboys. That is a name I would call him immediately in terms of he'd be at the top of my list. He'd be on the short list in the top 5, and he will get a job in this cycle. I'd be shocked if he didn't. The other guy, and if I were the new coach there, I would consider keeping him, even though it is a specific sort of run game. Their offensive line coach, Dwayne Ledford, is very good at what he does. And there are not that many offensive line coaches in the league that are real difference makers. He is somebody that they should have a conversation about keeping him in the building. And if they don't, another team I think would be lucky to land on him this spring. Let's keep moving here. The Browns fire Kevin Stefanski. Again, one that I think we kind of predicted might happen based on how this season unfolded for the Browns. Andrew Berry will be back as the general manager of the Cleveland Browns. This isn't surprising to me on either front.
I think the Andrew Berry thing is completely insane. I understand why they're doing it, but the Kevin Stefanski one it's such a bizarre and unique position where I totally understand why both sides needed to part ways. I also, as far as if teams are really obsessed with wanting an offensive guy, Kevin Stefanski is the first guy I'm calling, and it's not even close. Like, I still think that he's a very good offensive coach.
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
About him or Barry, or which side, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Both. I think that I'm with you. I think that Kevin Stefanski should be a head coach in the NFL again. I kind of want him to take a year off. I kind of want him to, like,
given how hard all of the last 3 or 4 years was, I would get it if he wants a breather.
I think that it would benefit him to do that. I doubt he will do that because I think that he loves being a football coach, and I think he will continue to be a football coach. There are a lot of different considerations here. The first part of this for me is that one of the reasons I would feel good about handing my organization over to Kevin Stefanski if I were one of these teams, the Giants, the Titans, he's made of the right stuff for this job.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one specific area of that I would always come back to with how things went in Cleveland. A lot of people that are coaches in the NFL, they are ready to make excuses. They're quick to do it, especially in private. He never did that. It was never one of those things where, our team was so hurt, or no, we didn't have the quarterback. Even when they made the Deshaun Watson trade, I think he had every opportunity to frame the offense kind of petering out a little bit with Baker as, well, Baker's too limited, and that's why we needed a new quarterback. Even if the organization felt that way, he never felt that way. It was never Baker is what was holding us back. He always believed you could win in the NFL with Baker.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that his kind of resilience in some of those moments and his understanding of what life in the NFL is as a head coach, where the only thing you can bank on is that you don't know how this is going to go, and it's on you to make sure your team can ride the waves. That's how he's wired, and I think he consistently did that as the head coach of the Cleveland Browns.
And I think you saw that in the way that, like, his teams were prepared. Like, I know that the offensive, like, the success of it and how well they produced, but every time I watched this Browns offense for the last 3 or 4 years, I still felt like they were giving themselves the best shot that they could.
One of the other, here's the phrase I'll use. Kevin Stefanski had to eat a lot of shit over the last 3 or 4 years, like, just period. He had to eat a lot of shit. And part of that is you make the trade for Deshaun Watson, and then you have to do everything now to cater the offense and to tailor the offense to what Deshaun Watson does well, in order to do everything that you does well. In order to cater everything to the things that Deshaun Watson wants the offense to be. He's not doing any of it well.
Right.
And by doing that, you have to remove yourself from what you want to do offensively, which is a lot of stuff that, one, you've proven works, and two, is proven to work around the NFL.
He did it with Jacoby Brissett, like, in the middle of all of that.
Yes. And so I think that's one of the areas where, again, there's so many different things he had to juggle and deal with, and that was one of them. And so that's part of why I think that this is just a natural endpoint. When we were talking about the silver linings for the Browns, we were talking about how the draft class within this year is good. There's some things that you can build on, but they really don't have a clear pathway to a quarterback. And making Kevin Stefanski oversee another season where the offense is pretty broken, the cupboard is bare, and you're trying to figure out what this is going to be, I think just saying, hey, thank you for everything that you did. It's time for you to seek out other opportunities. We're going to move on to a different coach with maybe a different appetite for what we still have to do here. I do think that mindset on both sides makes a lot of sense in this moment.
That's the part of it I get. Even if you're the Browns and you think Stefanski is a quality head coach, which, again, I think that he is, when are you realistically going to be seeing the fruits of that again? Like 2027?
Yeah.
Maybe by the time you solve quarterback a little bit, you still got to reshuffle basically the entire offensive line. Like,
the entire offense.
Yeah, pretty much.
The only pieces on the offense are the guys that you drafted this year and Judy.
Yeah.
That's it. It's Judy, Quinshaw Junkins, who's coming off a major injury, and Harold Fannin Jr.
And how long is Judy's deal?
He's signed for a while. He's all the way through like 2027 or 2028. That's it. That's the offense. You need to remake the entire offensive line, and you need a new quarterback.
There's just no reason to hold on to Kevin Stefanski like that. And again, I think he will be good somewhere else. But again, by the time you see any of the results of what he could possibly do in Cleveland, it's like you might as well start fresh.
Why do you think the Barry thing is insane? I don't think you're off base.
What has he done or accomplished?
A lot of this is going to come down to.
I understand the process of them acquiring picks, and they do a decent job with some of that. I do not think they have drafted well up until this class. And then I know some of it was probably the owner. The Deshaun Watson thing does hang over his head pretty heavy in my mind.
I don't think that's wrong. I think, again, what I was going to say is a lot of this is going to come down to what you think of the Watson trade.
Yeah.
And it's not only just how bad Deshaun Watson was, it's how you have to borrow from so many other things in order to deal with the fallout from the Watson trade.
Mm-hmm.
If you trade 3 first-round picks for a player and you give him the biggest contract in the NFL and he's one of the 3 worst quarterbacks in the league, there's almost no coming back from that unless you have an absolute heater in the mid rounds of the draft, which they have not, to be clear, and we can talk about that. What they had to do because of that deal is borrow and borrow and borrow from the rest of the roster and from future years to the point where the entire thing just shriveled and atrophied into nothing. And that's what you're left with. I can understand if you're the Haslams looking at Andrew Berry, who is very smart. He's a very good communicator. He's somebody that has a lot of command, and I'm not surprised they think he's the right person to oversee something like this. So it doesn't surprise me that they landed in this place. Where I get with Andrew Berry is the draft record is poor. There's no denying that. Here are the top 100 picks from the Andrew Berry era: Jed Wills, Jordan Elliott, Jordan Phillips, Greg Newsome, J.O.K., Anthony Schwartz, Martin Emerson, Alex Wright, David Bell, Cedric Tillman, Siaki Ika, Michael Hall, Zach Zinter. 2 of those players have signed extensions with the Browns. One of them is J.O.K. That's not his fault that J.O.K. might not play again, but that is a heinous record. And they didn't have any first-round picks because of the Deshaun Watson trade. I think my issue with the Berry regime more than anything, Andrew Berry is a very smart guy. Andrew Berry is much smarter than me. This job is more art than science. And I think that too often they haven't treated it that way. Some of the moves they've made are very black and white, and on paper they make sense. And I think that they've allowed that type of thinking to creep into how they do this a little bit too often. He comes from a place where he spent time with really smart people who are really good at this job. He spent time in Philadelphia. Howie Roseman had what was like a pretty transformative experience for him when he got moved to the other side of the building and essentially fired. And I think that he reevaluated some of that art versus science stuff in a way that has ultimately benefited from him. Andrew Berry used a phrase today when talking about how grateful he was to keep the job. He's like, I appreciate the fact that the organization thinks that I'm the person to handle this transition. He should treat it as a transition too. Like they need to start approaching things a little bit differently than they have for the results to be different. I think that can happen because I do think he's capable of that sort of reflection. And again, I do think that he is a smart, capable person. But I do think that they have to start approaching things differently than they've done in the past if they want results that are removed from what it's been like over the last few years.
I agree. And at least from that sense, I get why if in the Haslam's mind, like they were the ones that were pushing for the Deshaun Watson trade, like they are not holding that on him and putting that as a mark on his record and saying, okay, this was a little bit our bad. We're going to give you another chance to see if you can reevaluate the things that you do things. Because again, I agree that a lot of it was very black and white, a lot of, in theory, like we're just going to acquire all these resources and stuff like that. And so the idea with that has always been like, well, over the long run, that works for you. But like the reality is you don't get a long run a lot of the time in the NFL. You usually have shorter timelines than this. And so I do think he is in a unique position where he's going to get a second chance at this at the same job effectively. I'm still just dubious about how this is going to go.
Be really curious to see what happens with the conversations and the interviews that Stefanski gets over the next little bit. I do think he makes sense for the Giants. Like the Giants going with somebody who has done this job before and had success doing this job before, I think he's much more interesting to me than Mike McCarthy. And
oh, God, yeah.
We'll see what happens with him, and if he were to get paired with Jackson Dart, that's an interesting marriage to me just because what Jackson Dart does well is not necessarily the stuff that Kevin Stefanski wants to do, but Kevin Stefanski has lived in that like shotgun RPO world already, and so I do think that he has some fluency in it, and I do know he was very impressed with Jackson Dart through the process, and so that to me, that's the one where I'd be like, okay, I'd be curious to see that. I also think that he would be a potential good fit with Cam Ward in Tennessee. Like for those coaches with second-year quarterbacks seeking out stability with guys that have done this job in the past, I think that Stefanski makes sense to me for both of those teams. I just think for his sake, like I wish he would just take a little bit of time.
I hadn't been thinking about that, about him taking a little time off. I do think it probably makes sense just because of how much.
I don't think he's going to, by the way.
Right, but how much of those last 3 or 4 years probably wore on you. I think my favorite of those fits is Tennessee because I do think the offensive line is not great, but good enough to do a lot of the stuff that he wants to do. And also, like, I think Cam Ward came out of college as more of a guy who was like a gun quarterback, and I think he did a lot of that this year. But I do think he's a guy who can get under center pretty comfortably. You can roll him out, you can boot him. I think he can do some of the under center, just like straight drop back, chuck a post route down the field type of play action. Like he, to me, does fit into a lot of the buckets that Stefanski would want, like in a quarterback, in my opinion.
And I also think that he was impressed with Cam Ward in the process. This would not be a situation where he'd be getting tied to a quarterback that he doesn't like. And so I think that one makes sense in a lot of ways. Adam Schefter already reported today that he is expected to speak with the Falcons, Giants, and Titans about those head coaching jobs. And so I think that's correct. I do think that he should be a candidate and a very sought after one in this cycle. Get to our next one here. The Las Vegas Raiders have fired Pete Carroll. In a statement put out by the team, they said GM John Spytek will lead all football operations in close collaboration with Tom Brady. I assume that means overseeing the head coaching search that is about to happen. I'm not sure we were in a place where you could justify that staff coming back about how after the way that the season went for the Raiders.
This was the easiest of the other ones. And I know that there are a couple, you like the Stefanski one, it makes sense. The Raheem Morris one, you can kind of explain it. The Pete Carroll one had to happen because the whole calculus with Pete Carroll was that we were not going to have a long runway here, and we were going to get this thing going, and we were going to be competitive right out of the gate. You were thinking like 6 wins and a fun season at minimum. Like that was the bar for what you were trying to accomplish.
A full, like an NFL team full of adults.
Yes,
like
exactly. You looked like you were
point.
put together, and at no point did this team look put together. And I think that is when you arrive at that point where you are the worst team in the NFL. For again, a team that was supposed to be jump started, and with Pete, it's not like you had an extremely disappointing season and you have like a first-time head coach who maybe needed to figure some stuff out. Pete Carroll's done this before and probably is not going to be able to do this job for very much longer. So for you to immediately crash down to being the worst team in the NFL, it's hard to justify having let the string run out any longer.
It'll be fun to watch the things that get leaked out over the next couple of days. I think Pete Carroll's camp is already trying to get in front of the idea that Chip Kelly was not his idea, and the state of the offense was really the issue here.
I mean, that's fine, but like there are clearly
his son is the offensive line coach.
That's what I was going to. His son was the offensive line coach, and the offensive line that was in, I think, a fragile position. Like you could have seen the upside case.
Great word for it.
You could have seen the upside case where they are the 19th best offensive line. A couple of the young guys take a step. Colton Miller has a really good season, and they are totally functional. But it was also the case where it's like a lot of these young guys maybe don't work out. Maybe JPJ takes a step back. DeMar Glaze doesn't do what you want him to do. And all of these guys end up really being the worst versions of themselves, and they struggle to pick up stuff in pass protection. And they are maybe the worst offensive line in the league this year. Like that to me was like pretty unacceptable. So again, maybe he didn't hire Chip Kelly, but when your son is the offensive line coach and they are worse than they could have been, I think that's tough. And then the other thing with Pete, so much of the defense was his vision. And I know the defense wasn't necessarily the problem, but they drafted Darian Porter, who's like big, long, fast, who really didn't start in college, which is a crazy idea as a draft thing. They signed Eric Stokes, like Jamal Adams played 40% of the snaps for this team. One of their big free agency signings was Jeremy Chin because they need like a big, strong safety. Like it's just so much of the defense was in his vision. So it's hard for me to buy the idea that a lot of what happened there was not like in his vision.
Yeah, this one to me was just very easy. Like the promise and what you're sold with the idea of Pete Carroll is a level of competency. The ceiling, I think, is lower than you want it to be with a first-time head coach. This is a team that wanted Ben Johnson. They did not get Ben Johnson. They pivoted to Pete Carroll. And so you change what you're seeking out from ceiling with Ben Johnson, that's exactly the archetype, to floor with Pete Carroll. Well, if the floor drops out, then there's no selling point as to why you should continue this. Aaron Glenn is at least a first-year head coach that's sorting through that job with a young staff. The fact that that team looks like a disaster, okay, like that's a possibility for a first-time head coach. If Aaron Glenn had gotten fired, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think the considerations with what the Jets are doing and where the Jets landed and where the Raiders landed are very, very different for that reason.
And honestly, the one last thing I want to say about like how it's very easy to justify the Pete Carroll thing, the whole idea, again, was that it was like, you bring in guys, you compete, everybody's an adult, there's buy-in. Jacoby Myers did not want to be on this football team, and then they trade him, and he's like the most important receiver in the league on one of the best offenses in the league since they traded for him. Like it's that little like dichotomy there, like that split. It's pretty hard to justify.
I also assume you're just offended by the idea that they didn't figure out how to use Brock Bowers even early in the season when he was healthy.
we got so excited. I was so excited about what the Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty offense could be. And the fact that we didn't really get to see it for a lot of the season until like the last 3 or 4 weeks, maybe. And again, I know Bowers was hurt for a little bit of it, but they really, outside of that first New England game, did not know a lot of what they wanted to do with Bowers. And then Genty really never got going until the end of it, which again, offensive line was terrible. So I get it. But the fact that what could have been a really cool offense was ripped apart from us was really, really frustrating.
I wonder what type of coach the Raiders seek out as the guy to replace Pete Carroll. Like, is this going to be a situation where they look at a lot of the hot defensive coaches that are in this cycle? Do they want a first-time head coach as part of this? I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route, considering the guy that was supposed to bring you stability didn't do that. But this is a team that it honestly feels like such a blank slate that I'm not sure you have to paint yourself into one type of option because anything should be on the table. Like, there's nothing you're tied to with like the construction of this team other than like Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty. Even Max Crosby, I don't think is necessarily going to be on the Raiders next year.
Yeah, I really don't know what they're going to do. And like, even the defensive thing is funny because we've joked about like Patrick Graham potentially getting potentially sticking around, which would be really funny. But like, I do think they should still be really open to some of the defensive guys because, again, unless Stefanski takes this job, which him going from what the Cleveland offensive line had to be last year to going to the Raiders, like that should not happen for him. I would really feel bad for him. But I do think a couple of the defensive guys make sense for them. Like, I would be interested in them seeking out one of these younger defensive guys, whether it's Minter, whether it's Shula, whether it's Weaver. I don't really care. I do think that is probably the best bin they're going to be able to pick from.
Let's get to the last firing news that came down today. The Cardinals do end up firing Jonathan Gannon. I felt like this is one that was probably, just from the outside looking in, I think you could make an argument either way. And the argument for me for keeping him is that, okay, you were supposed to win this year. If you just look at the timeline, if you look at the investments, if you look at how much urgency they had this offseason, this was supposed to be the year where you were competitive. Injuries decimated this team. But even if you consider that, when they were relatively healthy early in the year, I don't think you had enough signs that they were on their way to breaking through. And so the question's going to be, if you bring him back, all right, if we're a little bit healthier next year, we're going to go out and get a new quarterback next year, almost certainly. Do you have faith in this staff being the group that is going to help us break through? And if not, is it just easier to cut the cord, start over, when you will probably have a new young quarterback in the building and you're already going to have something of a fresh start at one of the most important positions in the organization?
That's kind of where I'm at. I think when you go from what was a relatively promising 2024 season where it's like, okay, we're building to something, you can see what the vision for the quarterback is and the offense is supposed to look like. The defense was doing some interesting stuff with a pretty bare cupboard. And I think you go into this year thinking, okay, if we can get 15% better on defense and we can just, the young pieces on offense take their steps, Isaiah Adams, Marvin Harrison Jr., some of the running backs, whoever it is. And I know they get banged up and that kind of throws a wrench in it. There's a difference from being a little bit disappointing and maybe not delivering on some of that stuff to completely unraveling. And I know some of that, again, is a lot of injuries on defense, but the quarterback thing, like, Kyler Murray has his issues and he's not a perfect quarterback by any means. I think that whole thing unfolding the way that it did, where they could not come to some sort of agreement of how to run the offense around him and what they wanted to do with him, and then inserting Jacoby Brissett into the offense, believing that this was going to change things, and then they had like 2 good weeks and it really did not ever amount to anything after that. I think that does fall a little bit on the coaching staff. And then this one is harder and there's a lot more speculation. I'm very curious about what the whole Marvin Harrison Jr. deal is. Yeah. Like, him completely falling out of the lineup really is kind of bizarre, because even if we want to say that he's been disappointing for the 4th overall pick, he's still showed flashes where he can be a pretty damn good football player. Absolutely. And for that to unravel the way that it has, it's really confusing to me.
The defense, again, all the injuries that they had this year on that side of the ball, I do think that a lot of the stuff that Nick Rallis does is interesting. I'd be curious where he would land as a defensive coordinator in this cycle, potentially. Like, I think there's something there. With the offense specifically, you and I talked about this. Them losing Clayton Adams and kind of losing the foundation of the run game that they had built there, I think you felt that. I think you felt the fact that the offense specifically was really starting to stagnate a little bit. And that's kind of where I think you get to a place of, was this the right group for them to break through? And instead of doing the thing that so many organizations do where they're like, all right, well, we'll fire the offensive coordinator, we'll bring in a new offensive coordinator, and then that'll be kind of your last chance at this thing combined with the quarterback, they just decided to avoid all of that, which I think is fine.
Yeah, because at that point, we've spent all this time like getting Kyler Murray into this specific offense. And then obviously that goes right. What would have like changing the offensive coordinator and then maybe you give Kyler, like none of that would have made sense.
I don't think Kyler's going to be the quarterback next year.
He probably won't.
I think somebody else is going to be the quarterback next year. And that's the thing. Would you want to allow this staff to pick a quarterback in a lame duck year, or do you just want to kind of cut the cord and say, we're going to start over? And I can understand landing in that place.
Yeah, I would probably rather just start over.
Monti Ossenfort is staying there as the general manager. That to me also isn't surprising on a couple different fronts. I don't think the player acquisition part of who the Cardinals have been has been so bad where you think, okay, we absolutely have to move on.
Because a lot of the misses have been a little bit unlucky injury-wise. It's not just like they took a guy and he can't play. Like, it's been a lot of like the B.J. Ojulari thing and like Garrett Williams, who was good for them, missed time this year. It's been a lot more stuff like that, I felt like.
B.J. Ojulari at 41 feels like a miss in that first draft. There were a lot of guys picked after him in the second round where you drop that guy onto this Cardinals team and you'd feel pretty good about what he's giving you. Joe Tippmann, Osiris Torrance, DJ Turner, Brenton Strange, just like guys who are contributing to their teams. In 2024, the Cardinals had 7 top 100 picks. 4 of them have missed significant time due to injury. Darius Robinson, Max Melton was hurt for a good chunk of this year. Trey Benson, Tip Raymond missed most of this year. And then Elijah Jones, who's a corner, has barely played for them. And so that draft is essentially a nothing at this point. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. was their top 5 pick in that draft, and Darius Robinson was a first-round pick. And so it hasn't been a roaring success by any stretch when it comes to player acquisition through the draft. But I don't think that the way they've gone about it is misguided or incorrect or rooted in the wrong stuff. And I think that this front office, it's fine to me if you want to keep them. One of the other reasons that I think it's worth keeping this GM in this front office is they revamped everything about how the Cardinals operate. The Cardinals were such a strange organization where if you go back like 20 years, they kept promoting from within for their general manager job. And so a lot of their processes and how they evaluated players and the language that they used and the systems that they used were very, very kind of esoteric and in some ways outdated. And so they've completely revamped everything. And I think trying to maintain that vision is probably worthwhile, even if it's been a little bit disappointing. And I do think there is some talent here. I think you absolutely need, I've said this, no more half measures with the offensive line. Like, you need to make a serious and firm commitment to improving that group this year.
We need at least 2 new guys.
And, and they will have money in free agency, especially if they trade Kyler. But even if they don't, they will have a little wiggle room to bring in some known quantities along the offensive line. Either one of the Bills guys, players like that, those interior guys. That needs to happen for this team. And I think they're a really good candidate. If the Jets don't want a quarterback at 2, can you move up one spot or can you take that quarterback at 3? You've stumbled into a place where you might be able to find an off-ramp at that position. I think there is a decent amount of young talent on defense, even if some of those guys have been hurt. And so I don't think it's crazy to believe that the right hire here, if they can bolster a couple of those position groups, can get this team to a competitive place sooner rather than later.
I still believe that as well, because I do think the offense, again, if you fix the offensive line a little bit, the offense is talented. You have arguably the best tight end in football. Like, Michael Wilson has been insane.
He's been incredible.
He was crazy over the second half of the season. The Marvin Harrison Jr. stuff is weird, but I still think he's a very talented player, and that potentially with the right coaching staff, you bring him in and he kind of gets back to where he should be. And then the running back room is talented when they're healthy. They were just insanely banged up this year. And so I think you have that kind of working against them. So I think they still have talent on offense, even if they could use a little bit of help. And then the defense, like, when they were healthier earlier in the year, especially the secondary, they did show some signs of life. Like, I actually think the secondary is pretty talented when they have their guys. Like, Garrett Williams is good. I thought Max Melton was having a good year. Will Johnson, I think, could be really, really good. Denzel Burke was pretty good as a 5th-round pick for them, who I don't think they wanted to play this year, obviously, because they had Melton, but he had to come in, and I thought he looked okay. Like, the secondary's good, and if the front gets a little bit healthier, you add maybe one guy like, I know this sounds crazy for a team that won, 3 games, 4 games?
Again,
like
they were decimated by injuries.
And they purposefully took a step back at quarterback, basically. Like, it's I don't think they're that far away for a team that has only won 3 games.
I tend to agree with you. But again, I think I can still understand why they were willing to move on, because I think that for them to
both can be true, and that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for them to tap into what you're saying, I think a different coaching staff might be the answer as to in the actual path to get there. All right. So the 2 openings that already existed before the latest round of firings, the Titans and the Giants. We had a little bit of news about the Titans restructuring their organization in the last week or so. Mike Borgonzi, who's their general manager, he's going to lead the head coaching search. He is in charge of all the football operations. Chad Brinker, who's their president of football operations, he's still overseeing some of the longer-term vision stuff, which I think they kind of were already in that place when it came to who was, like, the timelines. The way it was described to me last year when I was there in the summer is the timelines were different. Right? Like Chad Brinker was on like a 5-year timeline. This is how we're going to operate within the building. Little things like this is what our in-house software is going to look like for how we organize the salary cap. Shit like that. That's what he's doing. Mike Borgonzi's picking the players. So I don't think that's a huge change from what was already happening. I think it's just a matter of streamlining it a little bit. They have 4 requests that they have put in for their head coaching job. One is Matt Nagy, obviously has a connection with Mike Borgonzi. That's a non-starter for me. It's just a non-starter.
Yeah, that one's a complete 0 for me. I don't have it.
I just don't understand what the argument is.
Because even if you want to make the case that he was okay in stretches as a head coach the first time, it was because of the defense.
It was a unbelievably good defense in 2018.
They were historically good. Like, they were crazy.
He's the offensive coordinator for an offense that has run out of road with one of the best players in the league.
For a place that he might have been brought back to because he was already there 7 years ago or whatever it was.
And it seems like he's not going to. He's like a free agent after this year. I just don't think there are many reasons that you would want Matt Nagy to be the head coach of the Titans. Some guys just aren't head coaches. Like,
that's the other thing.
That's okay. The other 3 guys, not surprising to see them on this list. Steve Spagnuolo, which again, similar connections with Borgonzi from their time in Kansas City, and then Vance Joseph and Lou Anarumo. Vance Joseph has done a phenomenal job with the Broncos defense. I think when we did the show with Connor Orr a couple weeks ago about coaching candidates, he was near the top of the list. I mean, there's really no reason he shouldn't be in consideration for some of these jobs. And then Lou Anarumo was a head coaching candidate for years based on what he did with the Bengals defense. And I think he did a pretty solid job with the Colts this year with a group that doesn't have a ton of talent. And so not necessarily any surprises on that list. And obviously we'll continue to check in with that. On the Giants side of this, we knew this was probably coming. We got the official word today. Joe Schoen will be back as the general manager of the Giants. Both of us have kind of made our feelings known about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of still whatever on that. I get it if they want to give him. See, I was going to say, like, I get it if they want to give him another shot at quarterback, but like now they're kind of tied to Jackson Dart at quarterback when like that felt like it was a Brian Dable thing. Like all of it is just, it just feels very mismatched from like, it just feels like a weird timeline to me.
I've said it every time we've discussed this. It can work. We've got plenty of examples of it working where GMs have struggled with one coaching staff. You bring in a new coaching staff and the GM does a better job over time. I do think there's a level of volatility to the gig where that is a possibility. I also just think that you're providing yourself or putting an unnecessary barrier in front of you to succeed. Like there is so little about the Giants roster and the way that they've built the Giants roster that I think is worth holding on to.
Yeah, because even if you like, the front is really, really cool. They were one of the worst run defenses in the modern era with that front. Like
we've gone over this. Dexter Lawrence was already there.
Yes.
They drafted Abdul Carter with the 3rd overall pick and just like stumbled into it.
Everyone would have picked Carter at 3. There.
Yes.
Like it's you don't get a whole lot of credit.
They just happened to have the 3rd pick because they were really bad.
Yeah.
And the Brian Burns trade, I made this joke like a week ago. I don't get credit for like having a nice car if I paid the sticker price on the car. Yeah. Like trading a 2nd round pick and giving a market deal to Brian Burns. Brian Burns has been a really good player. It's almost impossible for you to get excess value from the Brian Burns move because of what you gave up to get Brian Burns. And so I just don't think like the idea that, they built this really good defensive line. First of all, the defense still sucks.
It's terrible. Yes.
Second of all, like I don't think you deserve credit for building that group because you stumbled into half of it and the last guy, you gave up a crazy amount to get him.
It's a bunch of premium picks and premium capital on it. And like, yeah, it should be good. And honestly, yeah, when you calculate how bad the run defense, it's probably not as good as it should be.
Yeah. And so I'm just not sure there are many reasons to like have a lot of faith or provide a good argument for why this should continue, but it is what it is. Notable coaches and executives who are staying in jobs, and it has been announced that they are. Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin will be back with the Bengals. I don't think that should be a surprise.
It's not a surprise, but Zach Taylor is another one where I don't necessarily think that he's done an offensive job, but it just, to me, is one of those just at a certain point, you've kind of run out of road and the results speak for themselves. I know that Joe Burrow's been hurt a lot, but not making it to the playoffs 3 years in a row with him as your quarterback. And I also think Joe Burrow is awesome. He's a really good quarterback. I would like a head coach who pushes Joe Burrow to be a little bit different of a quarterback than he is. And I've been saying that for years. And so I think we've just gotten to a point now where we kind of keep running into the same issues over and over again. I would have liked to see some change, but I understand them thinking that this year was kind of just chalked because Burrow missed most of the year and being like, okay, we'll run it back one more time. We'll see how it goes after that.
Something small, but Duke Tobin is meeting with reporters on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
He really only does that once a year at the Combine. The Bengals are just a weird organization. It's just a very strange organization. It's set up in a weird way. Like, he's not really the GM, but he oversees the personnel department. Like, it's a mom and pop shop that operates differently than everybody else does. The fact that he is doing that, I think ownership and the people in charge there understand that there's a level of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think heading into next year, I think there will be a real conversation about what the Bengals have to accomplish for people there to retain their jobs. I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
If we go into next year with an understanding of like, if you guys do not make real noise, then we're going to have some change here. I think that's okay.
Because that's the thing, like in my mind, even with some of the injury stuff, if the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens, or even like the Chargers with Justin Herbert, if any of those teams miss the playoffs 3 years in a row, there would be changes. And so the Bengals are in a unique position where that just has not happened.
Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard, both back in Indianapolis. It's kind of a similar situation to me. Not there are differences in the sense that I think the job that Shane Steichen did over the first half of this year, it's hard to find a head coach and a play caller that is capable of that sort of level. Like, those are extremely valuable in the NFL, and I think that you should hold on to one like that, because the slide that the Colts had in the second half of the season is totally explainable. Like, it's like you understand how it happened. And so I think based on what Shane Steichen did over the first half of this season, you should bring Shane Steichen back. And in that vein, it's like, why would you change out the GM? Like, I just think similar sort of situation. Bring back that group next year. If you guys do not make the playoffs next season, this is over. Like, that needs to happen. And I think, again, I'm okay with the organization landing in that place.
I've gotten there too, because I really like what Shane Steichen has done. And again, when you can reach those highs as a play caller, that's something that you probably want to hold on to. And then I've had some of my issues with the way that Ballard has gone about things over the last handful of years. But again, if you're going to bring back Steichen, bringing in a new GM seems like a weird amount of pressure to put on Steichen. Then, in the sense that like now you're a little bit disconnected, I understand why they're going to run it back for one more year.
And we already talked about the Aaron Glenn thing. Like, I just think that's a situation where I'm not sure there's a lot of really good arguments. It's not that there aren't a lot of really good arguments. I think it's hard to find a lot to be happy or excited about with what the New York Jets were in 2025. At the same time, one and done, and just, again, throwing yourself into upheaval all over again. I think if you're the front office for the Jets, if you're Darren Moogie in this class, I would consider not taking a quarterback with the second overall pick and just kicking the can down the road, using that draft capital to bolster other areas of your roster, get a little bit more clarity about what the long-term future of the organization is going to look like. Because we do this all the time. We're like, well, next year's quarterback class is going to be better. This year's quarterback class isn't good. There are like two options at the top, and one of them is like, how many starts does Dante Moore have? It's like a dozen.
Yeah, it's not as much as you would want.
Yeah, this isn't a scenario to me where like the Patriots were in a really bad spot a couple years ago, but Drake May was available with a third overall pick. That's not revisionist history. Like, I loved Drake May as a prospect.
Drake May, that was the thing with like Drake May and Caleb going into their final years. It was obvious, like, oh, these guys are top 5 picks if they don't mess this up, and neither of them did, obviously.
And if you're the Jets, you have 3 first-round picks next year, and you are very likely going to be bad again. And it's a scenario where it might be a tough sell to the coaching staff, being like, hey, we're going to bring in a veteran. You guys are going to have to make it work. But they didn't do anything this year that puts them in a position to be demanding about what the quarterback situation is going to be. And so I think, hey, we're going to give you a Mac Jones type. What can you do with this? And going into the next season, maybe we'll draft a quarterback. To me, it's so early. It's January 5th. At first glance, that's my first thought about the Jets and just like the situation that they're in. Because allowing this staff to draft a quarterback that they like when there's a very real possibility this is the last year of the staff, I just don't think that's in anybody's best interest in a down quarterback year.
This is going to be one where I'm probably the most curious about how they handle the quarterback position.
All right. Well, that is all we've got for today. We've got a whole host of shows coming your guys' way this week. Building the Beast. Again, speaking of the draft, if you guys are not listening to Building the Beast, now is the time. We're officially in draft season. Our buddies Dave Hellman and Dane Brugler every single week breaking down all things draft. I think Dane's doing his all-rookie team this week on the show, plus some just early looks at a couple teams in the top 10. So encourage you guys to start checking that out if you have not. And then we will be back with mid-season awards on Thursday, which is going to be very fun. Last kind of call for you guys. There's still a few tickets left to the live show at Lincoln Hall in Chicago. If you are in the Chicagoland area, want to check it out, doors are at 6:30. Show is at 7:30. We are very much looking forward to it. And if you're around and want to come, encourage you to do so. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching. Follow the Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.